The gentleman, a part of the dispensary, commented on one of our posts about a beverage review and said something along those same lines, like, what are we doing with the rest of the plant, essentially? Yeah. And I think it's a really fair question, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself to scaling gummies across the country in the way that these brands are buying from, nutraceutical companies and then essentially creating their own product. I mean, just using it as an ingredient, not thinking about it holistically.
Well, and I think that's the disservice that it does too, is that it doesn't. Did you get the shot before you open that up?
I need this more than I need this shot.
I can appreciate that. Oh, it's plugged in over there.
These are good. These are really soft.
I think what makes me sad is not necessarily like the biomass that's left over, but what we're leaving out by only putting an isolate of CBN in, or only putting an isolate of CBC or CBG, when we know that there's all of these other things in the plant that are so beneficial,
right? But
because it's part of the, you can only have this much of this, and it's harder to do this, and it's more expensive. We rob people of some of the benefit for the cost.
Counter perspective. You walk into a store that sells these types of products. You get the retail employee's perspective on what CBG does. Mm-hmm. They're not mandated to say any specific antidote, right? So you get their perspective. I've been in stores and thought, I don't necessarily agree with what the counter is telling the customer. Mm-hmm. These products now, because they're isolated, allow the customer to try it on themselves. Mm-hmm. And although it's not great long term, it is very good for introductory cannabinoid understanding. Mm-hmm. And the on-ramp is nice to say, hey, we know this won't get you high. And there is a market for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's probably where one of the biggest markets is in the minor cannabinoids and how they can be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just because I brought it in today, but I was really proud of the product I made in April with Modest and Canna Connect, because it was balanced enough that you could have a couple of them even as a novice user. And I think in theory, I do think, and I want to pin Tanner down at some point and get an answer, but I do think you can make 110 milligram beverage. Mm-hmm. If you took one of these, and 5 of those, it's vague enough in the language. They're not saying you can do it. They're not saying you can't do it. They're saying 25 for each of these, and no more than 5 per serving, and no more than 0.5 of all others. Mm-hmm.
There's got to be a cost barrier to that at some point, though, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And also taste. At some point, the distillate will...
Yeah, there's not enough of all the other stuff to put in that will cover that up. Although ginger's a brilliant play, as well as lemon, too, because both of those have such strong profiles.
Yes, and that's a good terpene transition.
It is. Go ahead. Ooh, I love a good transition.
Well, before we talk about terpenes, I'd like for you to introduce yourself.
Cool. Do I look somewhere special to do that? This is me. Well, I'm Elizabeth Sage. I'm a certified ganjier. I'm the founder of Sage Advice. I am a born and raised Minnesotan. I spent 15 years, most of my late 20s and 30s in Chicago, and I have been back here in Minnesota for 6.5 years. And I've been pretty much lifelong cannabis user since I was 15, way back in the 90s when that started. And it's always been something that was very beneficial to me, but not something that I could ever take into my professional corporate life. And so at some point, in the In the early 2000s, when we saw, medical had already been established in California, things were starting to move towards rec in a lot of other places. I knew that I wanted to transition into the cannabis industry, but there wasn't a lot of opportunity, especially outside of the very few states that were starting to take some of that on. And so when I moved here to Minnesota, we had a medical program here. There was a medical program in Illinois, both very small, very limited in their capacity. And as soon as I moved, Illinois legalized by executive order within about 6 months of my moving. And so I had no idea that that would be on the horizon there. And I had just spent 15 years and moved my whole family back here. And so I was a little disappointed because that, theoretically would have been a perfect transition for me. And I think in hindsight, it was actually a really good thing. I think the Illinois market is kind of tough. It's a very corporate market, which some people might think that, with my background being so corporate, that would be a great place for me. But, Illinois is just a very interesting market. And all of the reasons that I left Illinois, I think, are playing into what makes Illinois' market oh so interesting. So in 2019, I started doing a little bit of cannabis tourism. So going to California, going to Colorado, going to these different places that had legalization to see what they were doing. And I think like a lot of people was like, oh, a dispensary sounds really interesting. Growing sounds really interesting. So a lot of these really fun little missions to see what was what. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, I was working for McKinsey & Company, which is a big, consulting firm that is very active and moving. And it just, it all shut down and went inward. And they were very generous in terms of making sure that our mental health was stable. We were still working 55, 60 hours a week, but they, all of the fun things that come with working at a place like that, we didn't have those anymore. So they gave us money to do things and spend however would make us happy. And about that time, I heard of the Ganjier program, and it was brand new, just launching that year, and it really sparked my interest because I thought, I have an amazing corporate background. I love cannabis. I know the impact that it has. I know a little bit about it. I need something that has a breadth of information that allows me to become at least acquainted with all of the different areas of the industry, and then I can find my way into the different depths of it and see where I can be most impactful. So I went through that in 2021. And so if you aren't familiar with the Ganjier program, it is a sort of two-step cannabis immersion program, and at the end you're a cannabis sommelier. So very similar to how wine has a sommelier and beer has a cicerone and cheese has cheesemongers. They're looking to create something that is, what is the sommelier of weed? And that is the Ganjier. So there's 38 modules. You do them all online. I went out to Northern California to do my live training for a couple days. I went back 2 months later. I took a test. There's 3 parts. There's a written test, there's a customer interaction protocol, and then there's the cornerstone of the program, which is a systematic assessment protocol. And essentially it's a 100-point scale similar to Robert Parker that rates cannabis on the flavor, the aroma, the appearance, and the experience of it. So I went through that. I got an amazing education, but it lacked a community. It lacked the ability to learn more. And I'm naturally very curious. I had too many questions. If I understood something, I wanted to dive deeper into it. And there was a lot of other people in there that raised their hands and said, I'm really curious about this too. Or, the program's really in depth, but it's static because it's just online. And so what is that continuing level of education? Cannabis changes so quickly that if you're not staying on top of it, or if you're even tracking where people were 5 years ago, you're 5 years behind because it's changing that quickly. So out of that was born my community and my business, Sage Advice. And I support certified ganjiers as they are out in the industry, as well as students going through the program. So they have live connections every week. We have different matters that we dive very deeply into. We work with cultivators across the country to look at their products and give them feedback on it. And essentially, we just provide a place for people to be seen and heard. And, it's a lot of people, they're weed nerds, and they've never met other people like that before, or they still live in prohibition states where they can't talk about this with anyone. So it's a continuous learning, and it's a beautiful place full of lots of beautiful people.
I didn't know all that.
Yeah.
Grasping this concept, which if you're only learning online, it's challenging to apply logic outside of the modules that you're
Very much
inside. I like that.
Yeah, and it's, there's people from every facet of the industry that have entered it. So oftentimes you get cultivators together, you get, retail people in the same room, you get beverage makers. You don't often get a doctor, a lawyer, a compliance specialist, 3 different cultivators, a manufacturer, somebody who specializes in formulations, and they're all in the same room, and they might not even be talking about any of the things that they're working in, but they're bringing their questions and their perspective for how it applies to each of their businesses. So the conversations are much more robust. And because I require everyone who is in my community to either be in the GANGIE program or have been certified, the conversation level starts at about 300 because we know what everybody knows. There's no going back to say, does anybody not know this? Because you know.
This might be a tough one to answer, but where do ganjiers land? Where have you seen?
That is a tough one to answer because I think truly the industry is still young enough that they're not landing the way a sommelier would. There's not restaurants who are looking for ganjiers because they're not selling weed with their food. It's up to each person to find their value. And we do have some people in a little bit more mature markets who have worked their way into retail establishments. So they are the certified ganjier on staff for enter XYZ.
Sure.
By and large, a lot of people are utilizing it in entertainment. So whether that is in doing private tastings and some of that chef work, we have activations that we've been involved with for different, like Hall of Flowers, for example, in California. If you're not familiar with Hall of Flowers, it's the largest business-to-business cannabis show. It's amazing, incredibly well done. This year, they opened up the second day to the public, which was really interesting and allowed them to kind of come in, meet all of these different brands. So we had a couple of certified ganjiers that went there. They did an activation with compound genetics where when people would come and they would smell the flower, they would be able to tell them, oh, well, this is the dominant terpene profile. Oh, here, this is how it was grown. So really walking the consumer through the experience of what the cannabis is, not just what the cultivar is, but like how it is grown, who grew it, is it sun grown, is it grown indoors, like all of these things to a connoisseur matter because they go into your end flavor, aroma, appearance, experience.
Can we go through what I would refer to as like the tenets of what makes up cannabis or how it's seen in the program or through the eyes of a ganjier?
So the assessment itself is, when the first thing that I do, at least, and it's a little bit different, there's an app that takes people through it, and the app for me doesn't necessarily go in the order that I use when I look at cannabis. So I like to open the jar first, the jar pop, and then, wait to see. And the first thing I'm looking for is the intensity of it. So people judge that very differently. Some people like to stick their nose right up in it. Some people like to let it sit there for a couple minutes and see how strong it is. There's a couple things that come into play. If you're in a really hot room, it's going to be more intense because those terpenes are going to volatilize a lot more quickly. They're probably already going to be there in the jar and just come right out as soon as you open it. It's up to each person. I think each ganjier kind of has their own way of going through it and doing it. So the first thing is the intensity, and then smelling the complexity of the flavors. Is there, is it gas prevalent? Is it fruit? Is it floral? Sometimes it's all 3 of those. So there's different categories that we categorize them in, and then going into the layers that are in each of those. So if I smell fruit, that's great. Is it citrus? Is it stone fruit? Is it, there's all these different kinds. If it's citrus, great. Is it grapefruit? Is it lemon? Yeah. Is it tangerine? So these layers of different things. And a tool that I like to use is a tasting wheel.
Yeah.
And that's good for any sort of gustatory art. And I use the process of elimination. So what does it not smell like? Because that's just a lot easier for me sometimes than trying to figure out what does it smell like. So that's the aroma. The appearance, looking at how well grown it is. Is it fully mature? Is it overly mature? What do the trichomes look like? Are there a lot of them? Are the heads still intact? And then the trim on it. Was it a farmer's trim? Is it well trimmed? Did they go a little too tight? And that's why there are no trichomes left on it.
Yeah.
The flavor, we always start with a dry hit. So most people, and at least me, I always smoke a joint or stuff a cone. I stuff cones. I'm just...
it's routine. It's
Listen,
a habit.
I am not embarrassed to say that. I can roll a joint, but I can stuff a much better cone.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
So taking a dry hit of that, getting that flavor on your palate, lighting it up. Do I still taste those flavors? Do I taste different flavors? How is that smoke? Is it full-bodied? Is it light? And a lot of times that trips people up, and I like to give a shout out to my friend Al, and Al's no longer with us, so I always like to remind people that this is her method, and she was a sommelier, and she was a brilliant ganjier, but she taught us when you inhale that smoke and it's in your mouth, think of milk. Is it like skim milk where it's real light and it's just, you swallow and it's gone? Or is it like cream where it coats your mouth and it just stays in there?
Right.
So looking for the body of that smoke, does it linger on your palate? And then again, those same flavors, did they translate from the dry hit? What else do we taste? Because a lot of times we taste different things than we smell. And then finally, experience. And I think there's a lot of people that will argue experience at the end of the day. That's the most important one, because even if it smells great, looks great, and tastes great, if you don't feel good when you smoke it, you're never going to smoke it again. And that's the one that I think is interesting, because all of these other things we've been able to put metrics to. I can tell you, if it only has two layers, then that's not super layered, right?
Yeah.
I can't tell you my experience and you will have the same experience. We could have vastly different experiences and agree on all of these other things.
And there's some truth to that with respect to terpenes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I've often given the analogy of essential oils and the legitimacy of the essential oils market to put terpenes side by side so that folks understand that different smells and different terpenes have different effects on our bodies in the same way that essential oils will activate different parts of our bodies.
Yeah, like when you get a really good massage and they'll give you like 3 oils to smell and they'll say which one speaks to you. I think cannabis is like that too for a lot of people. The nose knows. So you take a sniff and the one, like your nose will tell you, I like that. And sometimes people they like the really like the gassy or like the funky cheese, or there's people who like the baby poop smell. Like, these are all, you're going to learn to love that. You're not going to have a choice.
It's been 1 week and we're ever changing, there's ever changing diapers, I should say.
Yes.
Shout out to Gwen. And
to all the moms out there.
So pulling just peripheral or just off the top of my head, one of the things that I learned about first with respect to the Ganjier program was the dry hit. That became introduced into Canna Connect events last year through probably Jude Croyle. And that was a new thing for me and it made sense. Okay, all of a sudden I see, in the same way that you might swish a glass of wine around and take a smell, beer, like you said, a Cicerone. The more that I think about the Ganjier program, the more I realize it's about destigmatizing the plant. Because the Ganjier program is so complex, on the inverse of that is you're picking apart all of the nuances, all of the little things that make cannabis special, and we're not just plopping it on the table or selling a bag. That's what I'm trying to get at, right? There's so much detail that goes into growing cannabis and strains, cultivars, and not just the seeds, but the process, and then not just the process, but the post process. There's a lot of things you can do wrong along the way to screw the pooch. So moving ahead, what types of cannabis strains, cultivars, products are people currently purchasing in the legacy market based on the Ganjier learnings and space that you provide?
Yeah, I think concentrates continue to be the fastest growing segment, whether that's, in vape cartridges, which again, I'm a no judgment, like get it how you got to get it. And sometimes it's convenience, sometimes it's a price barrier. Like there's a reason that everything exists in the way and form that it does. But I see, when we think about being able to look at a vintage of something, so people get really excited about like a 2007 Dom or, whatever that is, cannabis doesn't hold like that. So you can't take a flower and 15 years from now pull it out of your cellar and be like, look at this amazing creation. It doesn't work like that. Concentrates can, especially hash, if done correctly, traditional hash, and preserved correctly, you can do that with. So I think that's where it's interesting. The U.S. is one of the only countries where flower is our sort of predominant choice of consumption. Most other countries prefer concentrates. So it's a very, we're the U.S. That's how we do. And it's interesting because I think we are starting to see that shift and change. And solely in the storage and shipping, too. When you think about shipping biomass, even, especially when it's been processed and packaged, flower versus concentrate, I mean, there's such a huge difference and so much easier to control a lot of these things along the supply chain with concentrates, depending on the concentrate.
Yeah, you're talking about a more refined product, so therefore a smaller package.
Right.
Naturally.
Exactly. When you look at, you take fresh frozen cannabis and you turn that into, say, rosin, your yield on that is, if you're lucky, 4%. And so you think about just the weight of that. Now we're just talking about the distribution of weight across, all of these. I'm assuming there's interstate commerce at some point here. And even honestly, even across the state, when you look at shipping flour in glass jars, which is probably the best way to do it in terms of preserving it, that's heavy. So think about the glass jar that it takes to ship an ounce versus what that ounce yields in concentrate.
Yeah, and then having perspective for price, given the amount of time that goes into refining the flour, refining the oils inside the flour into a consumable gram.
Yeah. Well, and also growing outside is not necessarily preferable for flour, but very doable for flour, for concentrates versus smokable flour. So you can grow large-scale outdoor flour for concentrate in a way that you wouldn't grow it for smokable flour.
Okay.
So a little bit more eco-friendly too.
I wonder how Minnesota's outdoor cultivation licenses and the square footage for canopy size, I wonder how that aligns with drawing conclusions to what type of a concentrate market we'll see. Are we going to have enough acreage to have a good supply of concentrates?
So maybe outdoors. If not, people will grow it indoors, but you're going to see the price point go up. I think one of the reasons that Michigan has the price point that it does on some of its concentrates is because of how much they're allowed to grow outdoors.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Michigan's got a great market for a lot of aspects, right?
I think for some aspect, if you ask the cultivators, they would not necessarily agree. It's a tight market.
Okay.
It's hard to make margins there.
Well, let's take a quick break and we'll come back with part 2 with Elizabeth Sage.
Cool.
Ever felt like running a cannabis business means running in circles just to get basic banking? Union Bank and Trust gets it. They've been helping cannabis businesses for over 10 years, solving problems like securing accounts, managing cash flow, and navigating regulations. No more jumping through hoops, no more runarounds. Just straightforward banking solutions built on trust, integrity, and performance. Check out unionbankandtrust.com today. That's unionbankandtrust.com. Hey, Kale.
Hey, what's going on, Tanner?
Nothing much. So we're here with Kale from Seed and Sesh. Super excited to be chatting with you today. Kale, I'm looking for something to do on Tuesday nights. Have any ideas for me?
Well, Tuesday nights on Payne Avenue are normally pretty quiet, but we do have home grower meetup nights on Tuesday nights. So, we have our little community of home growers out here, and when we opened the store, I realized there are a lot of people out here who have been growing a lot longer than me, and there's a lot of people who are looking to get into it. And so we wanted to just create a space where people could come and talk about their home grow and dispel some myths. And maybe I had people bring in compost for other folks, and
Cool.
it's a lot of fun. It's Tuesday nights, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Bring your own flower if you'd like. We encourage people to enjoy their flower and share their flower outside. But we always have events. We're looking to start getting some more classes rolling on Tuesday nights because people are looking to get just more information and more interactive stuff going on. So
Cool. So if I'm a grower, I should come on down to these events?
Oh, absolutely. Even if you're not a grower, but you're like curious about growing, or maybe somebody gave you a plant and it's in your window and you want to figure out how to like not kill it. Maybe you don't really want to grow like super big weed and you don't want to invest a bunch of money, but just the idea of it's really fun. Like I have folks who just like to make edibles, and they come down and they get to learn about, how to make their edibles better and things like that. So it's turned into a really cool community. There's a lot of different folks that come out. So
And remind me, where can people find Seed and Sesh?
so you can find us on Instagram at DD, that's like Dabbler Depot, Seed and Sesh. Also, you can find us at ddseedandsesh.com. And you could just stop down by the shop. We're at 949 or 951 Payne Avenue. They're right next to each other. You can't miss us. We're right across the street from Brunson's.
Sounds like a fun time. You know where I'll be on Tuesday.
All right.
And
we'll
you
see
should be there too.
Absolutely. We'll see you there.
I do love a pop vac jar though, so like big ups for that right away. That's so satisfying.
Ooh.
Do that again for the.
And we're back.
Very satisfying.
So Tanner just shared some.
Oh, that. She's got pretty color.
Tell us about what you've got in your hand.
Well, I would like. Do you have a tool that I can just poke it a little? I just want to poke it a little.
The first Ganjier ever on the Northern Lights podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, so it needs a little time to wake up. I think, like, initially, my first, like, the color of it, very, very nice.
Okay.
I think a lot of times with concentrates, people are looking for really, really light color, and they're used to BHO and some of that other stuff. And for me, I like to see it's a creaminess. I like it on the lighter side. It really is so cultivar specific, though. And so sometimes you are looking for something that is never going to exist washing that flower. And so really understanding what you're looking at helps you determine some of the quality around it.
Sure.
But yeah, like for example, the color was really good. The smell right away, I could smell it. I can still smell it sitting right here. I like to get into kind of the texture of it. And to your point, it's still a little cold. So it'll take a minute before I can start poking it around. But even in, when you look at traditional hash, it's got it's not just one color, right? It's kind of like multicolored, and it's got the dimension to it. And so looking at this, I can see some of that dimension in here. It's almost like it sparkles in a million different ways.
Sure.
But it's real creamed together like that. So yeah, that's what I see here.
This is outdoor grown?
It's a little crumbly right now, but I think that's just the cold temperature. I think if we poke it again in about 20 or 30 minutes, it'll look a little different.
Does hash change name once it's been refined from flower? Does it go from the cultivar strain to then embody a new name? Or
no, I think you use the strain name.
Still the strain.
Still the strain name, but just whatever type of hash it is.
OMFG. I do love that.
Isn't that fun?
And so one of the things that I think about when I see some hash in a jar like this, I think about the outdoor picnic tables in Northeast Minneapolis at Earl Giles and the Canna Club.
Yeah.
Do you remember when they first started?
I do.
I think it was about a year ago.
It was. Officially, it was in December. And so Robert and I have known each other for a while. In October of last year, we started getting together a little bit more informally, just kind of like a crew of us and hanging out and having just interesting conversations and things like that. And then after a while, he's like, oh, this is like, there's something here, right? People are craving community. They're craving an informal, like, come if you can, but you don't necessarily have to. It's a place to meet up. And the big thing for me, two things. Number one, they're asking you to come here for cannabis.
Yes.
Which no other restaurants and bars are really doing right now. So they've made that whole mezzanine area not just available for people, like it's only for doing cannabis. There's no alcohol up
Yes,
there.
right.
And I think there's something to be said, like, for us to have our own space. Like, thank you for recognizing that we need a space like that. But then going beyond that, they've given us a space outside. And so there can be consumption outside. And there's a lot of places still that are not comfortable with the smoking aspect of it.
Yes.
And so I say big ups to them for giving the community a place that they can get together and do some of the heady things that you can't do a lot of other places.
In public. And there's an open door.
Yeah.
Multiple open doors. There's at least 3 ways to get to the mezzanine, right?
Yeah.
And so the access and the repetition, the fact that it's every Wednesday from 5 to 9 is awesome. You don't need a ticket to get there, and they're uniquely equipped to offer a menu of both beverages as well as food.
Their food is so good too. Like, people sleep on the food, but you should be going there for the food and staying for the smoke.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you like, for me as of late, it's been a time thing, but no doubt do I think it's a quality experience.
Yeah. And they've done some changes too. Like, there's a bar outside now where you can place your drink and food orders, which I think is amazing.
I didn't know that.
And, I think you guys have been there before doing, I know, education around the legislation.
Yeah.
And that they're inviting brands in and giving them a place to showcase their wares, sample people out, and have, in-depth conversations with a lot of times competitors in the market. So I think, one of the things that we had kind of talked about was, like, Minnesota, what makes it different. I don't know if it makes it different, but there's a lot of heart here.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of heart in a lot of places where people are in this business, because you don't stay in it unless you really, really care. You might have got into it to make money, but you don't stay in it unless you really, really care. So there's a lot of heart and a lot of people coming together that haven't had opportunities to get together as professionals in this industry because it is so new.
Right.
So it allows that to happen in more informal settings. And I think people are more likely to share with one another and let some of those industry walls down and really start to work together. Cooperation is a real thing, and other industries are doing it. And cannabis, because of the secrecy of it for so long, because you couldn't talk about it, it has made people very hesitant in a way that has done really all of us a disservice. And I think it's great because you see some of that starting to shift, and places like Earl Giles allows people to do that.
Without a doubt. And there's a lot there. I think right off the bat, one of the quiet parts, the unfortunate quiet realities of what you just mentioned as far as being able to collaborate and is bandwidth and time, and are you thought out enough in order to plan ahead?
Yeah.
Versus not being able to do something because you're just staring right in front of what you have in front of you and you're unable to see peripherally how you could connect.
Well, and I think we're all kind of struggling right now is we all see ahead. We just don't know what that timeline looks like. And so a lot of people are stuck in this, like, I'm not sure I know what I want my next move to be.
Yeah.
And it's completely out of their control.
And then back to, the brand we're referring to, Earl Giles, I think the brand has an opportunity to evolve from, it's already multifaceted. So let me give it its flowers. There's a restaurant component. There's the drinks. There's the retail drinks that Robert helped develop with Earl Giles.
The Pifton
that's right, the Pifton line of beverages. But then they're also co-packing and producing behind the scenes for other brands.
Yeah.
But I think the maturity that Earl Giles has showed is also an opportunity for it to further evolve to be a space that can allow for You Betcha to come in and have their own product sampling night like they did. And so I see that as a more mature brand. And I do look to Robert Kaiser as a mature professional in this market and a friend and somebody who likes to have these in-depth conversations. I met him in a sauna. I met Robert through the Embrace North sauna community. So when I started talking to Robert, it was in 100+ degree heat, just talking about whatever. And
Yeah, no walls there, right? Literally no walls.
Man, is that a nice place to be. It really stimulates conversation. But Earl Giles, the mezzanine, every Wednesday, I just wanted to plug that because I know you have helped play a role in developing that and showing up.
Yeah.
A large part of what we talk about is one of the key growth hacks is showing up.
Yeah.
And then that's just time, and tip your bartenders, that's a big part of it too.
Always tip your bartenders.
Yeah. So, we've talked about some things. I want to give you the floor a little bit. What's on your mind and what would you like to discuss on the Northern Lights podcast?
Oh, God, like so many things. One of the things that we touched on a little bit was the market here in Minnesota, and you asked what new products. And one of the things I wanted to say, it's amazing all of the beverages and the gummies that we have. I think it will be really interesting to see when there is flower and concentrates for purchase, what people gravitate towards, because we have introduced our entire state to cannabis in terms of beverage and edibles. And so for a lot of people, when full legalization, adult use came around, they were like, well, it's already legal. Like I can buy it at Cub. And it's like, ooh, no, there's a little bit more education I think that we need to do for people to fully understand the different modalities that are available. And drinks are great. And, gummies are great too. But when we're talking about medicine for people, right?
Sure.
So cannabis to me, it's all medicine, and you can use it recreationally. Your body doesn't know the difference. If it needs it, it's going to go to where it needs. So there's that part of it.
These are like kids' vitamins then.
They are, yeah. But I mean, it doesn't mean that your body doesn't still need them, right?
Right, like dino vitamins.
That's the beauty of it. They're adult dino vitamins. I think it'll be interesting to see, some people need medicine, and medicine a lot of times is expensive.
Yeah.
And you have to have, the caregiver program is great, but that's one person who can grow one other set of plants. So either if you need medicine, you need to learn to grow it yourself. And that involves, for a lot of people, learning to grow, the setup of it, finding the right cultivar that works for them and for whatever their needs are.
Right.
Or your other options are to go out and buy them in the market. So it'll be interesting to see there are people who need medicine and they're going to want to grow their own. They're going to want to go buy the flower because they want that whole plant medicine. They know that it's not just the cannabinoids, it's the terpenes, it's the flavonoids, it's the esters, it's the thiols, it's all of these other things that are in the plant that are giving us all of the different effects that we are looking for.
For sure.
There will be recreational people who just want to go and get super high, and they're going to be okay still using some of these other products that are in the market. They might want to go try and find a high potency concentrate to do that, or they might not. I think we're going to see two very different consumers come out of this. We're going to keep some of our beverage, hemp, gummy consumers, and then we're going to see who's ready to transition to some of these other things. But I think where I was going is the price point for a lot of that. So beverages are a great modality.
Yeah.
On a daily basis, when you think about, you're limited to 10 milligrams total in a can, obviously 5 milligrams per serving.
Yeah. 2 servings in every can. That's what I always say.
If you wanted 50 milligrams, that costs you some money. That's not a cheap way. I have a hard time getting the same effects from beverages and edibles that I do from smoking a joint. Now, if you grow your own flower, especially if you grow it outdoors, but even if you don't, you consider the cost of lights and feeding it and all of that, dollar for dollar or pound for pound, you're so much better off smoking weed and growing your own that you smoke, or even buying it and using that to alleviate your pain. It's just a much more cost-effective way to do it. So I think there will maybe also be a consumer that has found pain relief in these products that will eventually transition into some of those other ones.
Yeah, go swim a little deeper. I like the third aspect, which I think Tanner and Jason Tarasek talked about last week, is the products that aren't legal now that are more refined, not just flour that you mentioned, but like we're missing vape cartridges right now, even in the CBG and CBD form. We're missing tinctures above 750 milligrams. And so before you and I met, but while we were both here in Minnesota, say pre-pandemic, you were able to tinctures did make up more of the market share, and there were, Delta 8, Delta 10, CBG, CBD vapes, and like I do miss those products. I realize that I'm not going to speak for the entire market. I know that that's only a smaller percentage, but I am looking forward to all of the products coming online. And then maybe you like the mini grown CBG gummy. Well, you're really going to like it in a vape cartridge, for example. I always have thought of the Minnesota consumer to be more familiar because we've had to go through like so many stages of cannabinoid adoption from CBD and onwards, CBG, and I could keep going, right?
And we've had things, pulled from the market too, right? Like
Yes.
THCV, which
Yes.
I'm a big THCV girl, and you can't get that anywhere anymore.
So for our TikTok audience, tell us what THCV is.
Well, it is a varin. So what's interesting, THC has a THCV, and then there's CBDV, and
They
so
all have
they
these
all
things.
have these varins, and so it's a really interesting cannabinoid that has probably existed for a long time. I mean, it obviously naturally, and through the process of breeding, people have bred for it and selected it out, and a lot of people get extra energy from it. That's what it's known for: appetite suppressant.
Yes.
It's not as psychoactive.
Right.
It's not hardly psychoactive at all. So especially when you pair that with some THC,
Yeah.
it's a nice combination. There is a farm in Northern California, Emerald Spirit Botanicals,
Yeah.
and they are known for their Pink Boost Goddess is their high THCV cultivar. And it's a really interesting, and it's a beautiful story. Joseph, his mother has been, so he's second generation. His mom is still out there gardening. It's him, his mom, his brother, and they were back in the Prop 64 days. So she was doing this for medical patients, and it was a very different, here in Minnesota, when we think about what the medical market looks like, it is actually very transactional. It's very much like going to a pharmacy. I don't know if you were ever a medical patient, but I was. In my experience, you go to a doctor, they do this, but when you go to the dispensary, you have to talk to a pharmacist there. And it's interesting, talking to the pharmacist there, and there's a lot of misinformation that the pharmacist gave me. And that's, like when we know better, we do better. And hopefully by now we know better.
Shout out to Paul.
But it was a very sterile process too. There was no flower available at that time. It was only distillate. It was only, you could buy, THC 1-to-1 or CBD. Like there just was not a lot of that.
Not a lot of transparency.
Right. So medical in California back in the Prop 64 days was farmers these were small, independent, almost like co-ops that they were selling into. They oftentimes grew specifically for patients. One of these dispensaries, they would only have 50 members. And so they worked directly with the farmers to grow the medicine for the patients. So it really was personalized medicine.
Yes, I love that.
If you will.
Right.
And so his mom's been in the game since back in those days, and now moving into the legal market, they've been doing their Farm Cut Canna is the brand that they release under, and they're with 4 other, they're all very regenerative permaculture farms up there. But the plant, for a long time, they weren't testing for THCV. And so it wasn't until they discovered what it was and could start testing for it that they realized this plant that they've been breeding for so long was super high in THCV. And they would have people come to them and tell them all the time what it was doing for them.
Yes.
And without knowing what it was, they just kept breeding for whatever that was. And it turns out it was THCV. But there's something really beautiful about the way the plant works with people and the people work with the plant. And when they can give you that feedback and say, that made me feel really good, you can say, okay, like what are we doing with that we can continue to do to continue the evolution of the plant and the evolution of the medicine.
Yeah. And to give credence to the Ganjier program while also highlighting THCV, it's very hard for regulator X, Y, or Z to understand when we tell them what you just told me, that this is called THCV, the V stands for Varin. It is THC, but it's a different compound, and the effects of it are much different. Therefore, you shouldn't be as worried about
You don't have to regulate the same way.
You don't have to regulate the same way, yet we're not able to find that product on our shelves in Minnesota currently.
Right. And it is truly a wellness product.
And lends itself to help women quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the medicine is misunderstood.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned women. One of the products that I like to highlight and was really interesting. So in my community, we meet 3 times a week and do different things. And
Plug the name of it again.
Sage Advice Community Education. But then I will also plug, it's an interactive Zoom call every other week with 2 other women. It's called the Great Lakes Bake Club. It features Angelique Zarillo, who's a certified ganjier out of Chicago, and Sarah Tupper, who is a cannabis lounge owner and product designer out of Michigan. So we are here in these 3 Great Lakes states trying to have conversations about cannabis, but also about entrepreneurship, about mothership, because they all kind of go together. And we so often find ourselves in rooms and spaces with people needing resources, needing community, other things to talk about. So there's a company out of California. This is like interesting products that I don't know that are going to take off in Minnesota, but I think should take off everywhere. So I heard about Hello Again a few years ago, and 2 women who were going through menopause. They're in Santa Monica. They're, they're not cannabis girls. They were 2 women who were looking for relief from their symptoms, and they ended up in a dispensary and trying cannabis and realizing like, oh, there's something to this, but they didn't want to get high. And so they were like, how can we do this? How can we get the symptom relief that we're looking for? And they created vaginal suppositories, and they're loaded with different ratios of THC to CBD, other botanicals, and they have marketed it under menopause. There's one for sleep, there's one for periods, and there's one for hangovers, which is, so it's kind of like spanning the spectrum of womanhood, all of the different things that we could need. And it's a really unique modality that most people don't ever think about. But when we think about the endocannabinoid system and where all our receptors are clustered in our body, our reproductive systems are heavily, heavily influenced. So being able to put something that is effective, it's transvaginal, so like transmucal,
Yep.
Same as a tincture, it has direct absorption into your bloodstream and localized. You're right there where the pain is. So like endometriosis, PCOS, all of these different things.
There's so many people that need that product.
And they don't know that it exists, and it is so effective. So we love Patty and Carrie, and we're very excited to learn a woman named Lisa Williams bought this product and is turning it hemp-based. So she is Texas-based and is like, oh my God, this is amazing. Everybody needs this. And we're like, oh my, like we kept telling them that, like we want it everywhere. So we were really excited. We had her on Tuesday.
Oh, you did.
And came and, talked to people about it. And again, it's like something people don't really know about. And one of the fun facts that I like to point out, they won the Emerald Cup 2 years ago for Best Topical. And one of the people in my community, he was a judge that year, and he came on and told us like he used them. So they can be used rectally too. And so people who have colorectal cancer, prostate cancer, huge relief for things like that. And those can be really, really difficult things to treat.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm down to explore that because it is localized. I wasn't familiar with that term. As soon as you said, I go, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I used it after, so my youngest child is 2.5. And so that was part of my postpartum recovery, was using suppositories because, again, very intense, very localized relief.
Inflammation reducer. Okay, I see it. Yeah. The quick aside, I was reading today that our favorite MSO, GTI, is partnering with Magnolia Bakery.
I did see that.
And Magnolia Bakery might be my favorite banana cream pudding.
Yeah.
Oh, it is so good.
There's a reason they're known for it.
And GTI is finding a way to make that product hemp-based so that effectively they are now turning it from a one state by one state into a 48 or 49 state opportunity. We'll wrap up shortly here, but in a nutshell, what do you think of this new on-ramp into the cannabis industry through hemp-derived products?
Well, I was going to say, I think somebody, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like, I don't know that banana pudding needs to get you high. Like, can we just let banana pudding be banana pudding?
Banana pudding already does kind of get me high.
Kind of,
You know what I mean?
Like, so it's interesting to me because I love different modalities. I love making people realize that it's there. I love that it's accessible, but like at some point it gets silly, is what I'm going to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a great point. And that's where marketing comes into play.
That's, yes.
But, you know, we'll keep going a little bit, but it's 2024. We're nearing the end of 2024. We're looking ahead to 2025. We have seen the hemp-derived market legitimize. We're getting very close to social equity licenses being awarded. It's about to start happening. If it already hasn't happened, it's about to start happening. What advice would you have for someone, potentially someone with less cannabis experience, but they're a user, but they're not working in the industry, but they've been around the plant? What advice would you have for someone like that looking to enter in on the professional side of the industry?
I would say get in where you can. And so take whatever professional knowledge and skill you have now and move that into the industry. And if that's not an option, to just like cannabis, you know, start low and slow, but it actually moves really quickly. So a lot of times people are offended saying like, I wouldn't be a bud tender or a store manager because I was a CFO or a, you know, marketing director.
Yeah.
And you know, like I get that, but it goes really fast. That's what people don't necessarily understand, is just because you start somewhere doesn't mean 6 months later you won't actually be in the role that you wanted to be in at the very beginning. But it takes heart. And I would tell people, just because you like smoking weed doesn't mean the industry is for you, because it's a lot more fun if you still have your job that pays you really well and you don't have to hustle and then you just pay for weed. Like,
yeah.
there's a trade-off at some point, right?
Absolutely.
But I think there's a lot of opportunity. You also have to think outside of the box. Everybody at first, you know, I said I went on my little journey where I'm like, maybe I want to grow, maybe I want to own a retail. It goes so far beyond that. So thinking about things that aren't plant touching until we have descheduling, until we have, you know, all of these other things that are prohibiting us from running really profitable businesses.
Yeah.
Think about the things that you can do that you don't have those restrictions on, that you can still be impactful,
Yeah.
but you don't have to hustle so hard.
And, you know, stop by Earl Giles on Wednesday nights.
Well, and networking, like
Yeah.
truly that is the lifeblood of this industry, and you never know who you're going to meet. I'm always surprised at people that don't know each other. I'm like, how do you not know this person? And I think, you know, I'm naturally a connector, and I see all of this as one big puzzle that I'm trying to figure out the pieces of it too. And there's a lot of really good players in this game, but they don't necessarily know each other. They don't necessarily know how they're supposed to interact with one another. And again, we're also at this point where people are like, yeah, I want to start, you know, like I have everything I need to start a grow. I just don't have a license. And, you know, once I have that license, will there be retail that I can sell it to? So I think there's this big sort of, I call it like the collective inhale,
Sure.
where everybody's holding their breath waiting for like, okay, we're all ready. We've all got all the pieces in play. Like somebody just has to say start.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Somebody.
in a perfect world.
Somebody.
Yeah. So, Elizabeth Sage, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah.
Glad we did this.
Me too.
Love to do it again in a year and see where
Yeah.
things are at. Maybe there will be some retail stores.
I sure hope so, because I'm a shop girl.
Yeah, and I know there will be more ganjiers in the state of Minnesota.
You know, I will say, outside of California, we have more ganjier than any other state. And that's something I'm super proud of, because I think, you know, number one, it shows people's commitment to it. But I think number two, like, I think it says something about me. Like, they must not think I'm stupid,
Hell
right?
yeah.
Like, they might be into it.
Check out Sage Advice and the Ganjier program. Reach out. She is here for you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at the Sage Ganjier. You'll see a lot of stuff in there. It's a lot of motherhood. It's a lot of home life. It's a little bit of it's a lot of bit of cannabis too. But it's kind of all the things.
Gardening.
It's gardening. Yeah, I tend to say cannabis probably more than I should.
Hey,
I
we're
can't
gonna
help
keep
myself.
going. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll be right back with some high notes, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.